My phone buzzed with the 5 millionth view notification as I stared at the video that destroyed my family forever. There I was, 26-year-old Sloane Meadows, being violently shoved into a marble wall by my own father at my sister's wedding reception. The sickening crack of my shoulder hitting stone echoed through expensive speakers, while 300 guests gasped in horror. What they could not see was the 20 years of financial abuse, stolen inheritance, and systematic gaslighting that led to that moment. But karma was about to serve justice in the most unexpected way possible. Before we dive into this wild family revenge story, I want to know where you are watching from. Drop your location in the comments below and smash that like button if you are ready for some serious family drama justice. Do not forget to subscribe because this story has more twists than a roller coaster, and trust me, you will want to see how this all unfolds. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, I always knew something was wrong with our family dynamics, but I could never put my finger on exactly what it was. My father, Richard Meadows, was a successful investment banker who prided himself on his impeccable reputation in our wealthy community. My mother, Patricia, was the perfect socialite wife who organized charity galas and country club events. Then there was my sister Celeste, 3 years younger than me, who could do absolutely no wrong in their eyes. The favoritism was so blatant it was almost comical. When Celeste wanted to study abroad in Paris for her junior year of college, my parents immediately wrote a check for $30,000. When I asked for help with my student loans after graduating summa cum laude from business school, my father told me that struggle builds character and I needed to figure it out myself. When Celeste crashed her BMW into a mailbox, while drunk, my parents bought her a brand new Mercedes and told everyone she was a victim of faulty brakes. When I got a small dent in my 10-year-old Honda Civic, my father lectured me for 20 minutes about responsibility and made me pay for the repairs myself. But the real wake-up call came when my grandmother passed away 2 years ago. Grandma Rose had always been my champion, the one person in the family who saw through the golden child facade and treated me with genuine love and respect. She had explicitly told me multiple times that she was leaving me her house in Martha's Vineyard, worth approximately $2.5 million, because I was the one who visited her every weekend and took care of her when she got sick. Imagine my shock when the will was read, and suddenly Celeste was inheriting everything. The house, the jewelry, the investment portfolio, even Grandma Rose's beloved vintage car collection. I sat in that lawyer's office feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. When I questioned the attorney about what my grandmother had told me, he looked genuinely confused and showed me the will dated just 3 months before her death. The signature looked perfect. Everything was legally binding. But something felt terribly wrong. That night, I called my parents demanding answers. My father's response was chilling in its casual cruelty. Maybe Grandma Rose realized that Celeste would be more responsible with the inheritance, he said with a smirk in his voice. Besides, you have always been too emotional and impulsive. This is probably for the best. My mother chimed in with her typical passive-aggressive sweetness. Darling, we know you are disappointed, but family means supporting each other regardless. Celeste will make wonderful use of Grandma Rose's legacy. I spent the next 6 months in a fog of grief and confusion. I started seeing a therapist who helped me recognize the patterns of emotional abuse and financial manipulation that had been happening my entire life. Dr. Sarah Martinez was the first person to use the term financial abuse when describing my family's treatment of me, and suddenly, everything clicked into place. Meanwhile, Celeste was living it up in Grandma Rose's house, posting Instagram photos of herself, hosting parties with her sorority friends, and treating the place like her personal vacation rental. She had immediately quit her entry-level marketing job, claiming she needed time to find herself and honor Grandma Rose's memory. The sight of her lounging by the pool that my grandmother and I had sat beside for countless heart-to-heart conversations made me physically ill. But I was not going to take this lying down anymore. I hired a private investigator named Marcus Webb, a former police detective who specialized in financial fraud cases. What he discovered over the next 3 months would change everything and set the stage for the most satisfying revenge I could have ever imagined. Marcus found irregularities in the will that were subtle but significant. The paper stock was different from my grandmother's usual legal documents. The notary stamp had been backdated. Most damning of all, security footage from the nursing home where my grandmother spent her final weeks showed my father visiting her multiple times with briefcases and document sessions that were never mentioned to me or recorded in the official visitor logs. Armed with Marcus's preliminary findings, I knew I needed irrefutable proof before making any accusations. My family had money connections and a reputation to protect. If I was going to take them down, I had to be absolutely certain of my facts and have evidence that could not be disputed or swept under the rug. Marcus suggested we dig deeper into the financial records, but accessing those documents legally was going to be tricky. That is when fate intervened in the form of my cousin Jake, who worked as a paralegal at the law firm that handled my grandmother's estate. Jake had always been the black sheep of the family, someone who never quite fit into the country club lifestyle that my parents valued so highly. When I approached Jake about my suspicions, his reaction was immediate and intense. "I knew something was fishy about that whole situation," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "Your father was so aggressive about rushing through the probate process. He kept calling the office demanding updates and pushing for everything to be finalized as quickly as possible." Jake agreed to help me access the files, but we had to be incredibly careful. Over the next month, we methodically photographed every document, every signature comparison, every piece of evidence that might prove forgery. What we found was even more damaging than I had imagined. Not only had the will been forged, but my father had been systematically stealing from my grandmother's accounts for over 2 years before her death. Small withdrawals at first, just a few thousand here and there, that could be explained as medical expenses or household costs. But in the final 6 months of her life, the amounts had escalated dramatically. He had transferred over $400,000 from her investment accounts into shell companies that he controlled. The forged will was just the final step in a long-term embezzlement scheme. My father had been betting that no one would question the inheritance because Celeste was family, and challenging a will is expensive and emotionally draining. He was counting on my grief and financial limitations to keep me from digging too deep. But the most heartbreaking discovery was a series of letters that my grandmother had written to me in her final month's letters that had never been delivered. In them, she expressed her concern about my father's increasing involvement in her finances and her intention to revise her will to protect her assets from his influence. The final letter, dated just 2 weeks before her death, explicitly stated her plan to leave everything to me, and her fears that my father might try to interfere with her wishes. Reading those letters felt like getting a final hug from my grandmother, but also like having my heart ripped out all over again. She had tried to protect me, tried to ensure that I would be taken care of, and my own father had stolen that final act of love and turned it into another weapon to use against me. With this evidence in hand, I knew I had enough to destroy my father's reputation and potentially send him to prison. But I also knew that going public with these accusations would tear our family apart forever. Despite everything they had done to me, the thought of nuclear family destruction was terrifying. That is when Marcus suggested something that changed my entire perspective on the situation. "Sloane," he said during one of our strategy meetings, "you are thinking about this like someone who still believes your family operates in good faith. But people who steal from their own mother and forge legal documents to cheat their daughter out of an inheritance are not operating in good faith. They are criminals who happen to share your DNA." He was right. This was not about family loyalty or keeping peace. This was about justice for my grandmother and stopping my father from potentially victimizing other people. But I still was not sure about the best way to proceed until Celeste announced her engagement to Trevor, the son of one of my father's biggest investment clients. The engagement party was going to be a massive social event with everyone who mattered in our community attending. My parents were already talking about sparing no expense for the wedding, using money that rightfully belonged to me to fund their golden child's perfect day. That is when I realized the perfect opportunity for exposure was about to present itself. If my father wanted to play the role of the generous patriarch funding his daughter's fairy tale wedding, he was going to do it with an audience that would remember every detail when the truth came out. The next phase of my plan required careful coordination and absolute discretion. I could not afford to tip my hand too early or give my father any opportunity to cover his tracks or spin the narrative in his favor. I needed allies who could help me execute the perfect public exposure at the moment when it would have maximum impact. My first recruit was Amanda Martinez, an investigative journalist who had written several exposé articles about financial fraud in wealthy communities. Amanda was hungry for a story that would combine family drama with white-collar crime, especially one involving such a prominent local figure as my father. When I showed her the evidence Marcus and I had compiled, her eyes lit up with the excitement of someone who had just struck journalistic gold. "This is bigger than just inheritance fraud," Amanda explained during our first official meeting. "Your father's investment firm manages accounts for dozens of wealthy families in this area. If he was willing to steal from his own mother, what do you think he might be doing with client funds that are not as closely scrutinized?" That possibility had not occurred to me, but it made perfect sense. Amanda agreed to help me expose the story in exchange for exclusive reporting rights. She would begin her own independent investigation into my father's business practices, while I focused on gathering more evidence about the will forgery. My second ally came from an unexpected source. Trevor's mother, Diane Blackwell, had always been cordial but distant at family gatherings. However, when I accidentally ran into her at the country club and mentioned some concerns about my family's financial situation, her demeanor changed completely. "I have to tell you, Sloane, I have had some concerns about your father's investment advice lately," Diane confided over afternoon tea. "Some of the returns he promised have not materialized, and when I ask for detailed statements, he always has some excuse about delays or processing issues." This was exactly what Amanda had predicted. I encouraged Diane to ask more questions and document any suspicious behavior, positioning myself as a concerned family member who shared her worries. Within a few weeks, Diane had uncovered several irregularities in her own accounts and began quietly reaching out to other clients who might be experiencing similar issues. My third crucial ally was someone who found me rather than the other way around. Dr. Patricia Reeves, a forensic accountant who had been following Amanda's preliminary reporting, contacted me through Marcus to offer her professional services. Dr. Reeves specialized in complex financial fraud cases and had testified as an expert witness in several high-profile white-collar crime trials. "What your father has done goes beyond simple inheritance theft, Doctor," Reeves explained during our first consultation. "The pattern of behavior suggests a sophisticated understanding of financial manipulation and a willingness to exploit trust relationships for personal gain. This is the profile of someone who has likely committed similar crimes before and will continue to do so unless stopped." Dr. Reeves agreed to conduct a comprehensive forensic analysis of all the evidence we had gathered pro bono in exchange for the right to use the case as a teaching example in her graduate-level courses on financial crime investigation. But the most important ally I gained during this period was my grandmother's former caregiver, Maria Santos. Maria had worked for Grandma Rose for the final 3 years of her life and had witnessed many of the interactions between my grandmother and father that were crucial to proving his manipulation and coercion. When I tracked down Maria through the nursing home, she was initially hesitant to get involved. But when I showed her the letters my grandmother had written, Maria began to cry. "Your grandmother was so worried about your father in those final months," she revealed. "She told me many times that she felt like he was pressuring her to make financial decisions she did not understand. She was scared, but did not know who to trust." Maria had kept detailed notes about my father's visits, including dates, times, and concerning behaviors she had observed. Most importantly, she had saved several voicemails that my grandmother had left for me during her final week's voicemails that my father had apparently intercepted before they reached my phone. In these messages, my grandmother's voice was weak, but her message was clear. She loved me. She was worried about my father's influence over her affairs, and she wanted me to know that no matter what happened, I should never doubt her true intentions regarding her estate. Hearing my grandmother's voice again, knowing that she had tried to reach out to me and had been prevented from doing so, filled me with a rage that was both devastating and empowering. This was not just about money or inheritance anymore. This was about honoring my grandmother's memory and ensuring that her voice was finally heard. As Celeste's wedding planning kicked into high gear, I watched my father play the role of the generous father of the bride, throwing money around like confetti and basking in the admiration of everyone who praised his devotion to his daughters. The irony was almost too much to bear, but it also steeled my resolve for what was coming next. The wedding was scheduled for the first weekend of June, just 3 months away. Amanda had agreed to time her exposé article to publish the morning after the ceremony, giving us maximum impact while avoiding any legal issues about interfering with the event itself. Dr. Reeves would have her forensic analysis completed by then, providing unshakable expert testimony about the fraud. Maria was prepared to go on record with her observations and evidence. Everything was falling into place perfectly. Or so I thought, until I discovered that someone in my alliance was not who they claimed to be, and the betrayal came from a direction I never saw coming. 3 weeks before the wedding, my carefully constructed plan began to crumble in the most devastating way possible. I discovered that Jake, my cousin who had been helping me access the legal documents, had been feeding information back to my father the entire time. The realization hit me like a freight train when Marcus called with urgent news that changed everything I thought I knew about my family's loyalty. "Sloane, we have a problem," Marcus said, his voice tense with concern. "I have been monitoring your father's communications as part of our investigation, and I just intercepted a phone call between him and Jake. Your cousin has been reporting every move you have made for the past 2 months." My hands started shaking as the full implications sank in. Jake knew about Amanda's investigation, about Dr. Reeves's forensic analysis, about Maria's testimony, about every single piece of evidence we had gathered. He had access to all of our strategy meetings, all of our plans for the wedding day exposure, all of our carefully laid groundwork for bringing down my father. The betrayal cut deeper than anything my parents had done to me because I had trusted Jake completely. He was supposed to be the ally who understood what it felt like to be marginalized by our family. He was supposed to be someone who shared my desire for justice and truth. Instead, he had been playing a double agent role, probably in exchange for some kind of financial incentive from my father. When I confronted Jake directly, his response was even more crushing than I had anticipated. "Look, Sloane, I am sorry, but I have got my own family to think about," he said without even trying to deny the accusation. "Your father offered to pay off my student loans and give me a job at his firm after I graduate law school. I cannot throw away my future for some revenge fantasy that is probably going to backfire anyway." The conversation revealed the extent to which my father had been playing chess while I thought we were playing checkers. He had known about my investigation almost from the beginning and had been using that knowledge to stay several steps ahead of me. Worse, he had been feeding Jake false information to pass along to me, sending us down investigative rabbit holes while he covered his tracks and prepared his own counterattack. Besides, Jake continued, his voice taking on a cruel edge that reminded me sickeningly of my father. "Do you really think anyone is going to believe your word against his? He is a pillar of this community. You are just the bitter daughter who could not handle not being the favorite child. This whole thing is going to make you look pathetic and vindictive." That night, I called an emergency meeting with my remaining allies to assess the damage and figure out if we could salvage anything from our months of work. The mood was grim as we realized how much sensitive information had been compromised and how thoroughly my father had outmaneuvered us. "He knows about the forensic analysis, so he has probably already moved or hidden any remaining evidence," Dr. Reeves said, her professional composure cracking slightly. "He knows about Maria's testimony, so he has probably already discredited her or found ways to explain away her observations. He knows about Amanda's article, so he has probably already prepared a media strategy to control the narrative." Amanda was furious both at the betrayal and at the professional embarrassment of having her investigation compromised. This is exactly the kind of thing that makes sources reluctant to come forward in financial fraud cases, she said, pacing around my living room like a caged animal. If word gets out that we got burned this badly by an inside source, it could damage my credibility for years. But Maria, surprisingly, was the one who refused to give up hope. Your grandmother did not raise a quitter, she said firmly, her voice carrying the strength that had helped her care for sick and dying patients for decades. She knew your father was dangerous, and she trusted you to be strong enough to stop him. We are not going to let some cowardly boy destroy what she believed you could accomplish. Maria's words reminded me why I had started this fight in the first place. This was not about proving I was smarter than my father or getting revenge for years of mistreatment. This was about honoring my grandmother's memory and preventing him from victimizing other people the way he had victimized her and me. Over the next week, I watched my father move into damage control mode with military precision. Suddenly, Jake was telling people that I had been acting erratically and making wild accusations about family members. Suddenly, there were rumors circulating about my mental health and my inability to cope with grief over my grandmother's death. Suddenly, my father was positioning himself as the concerned parent trying to help his troubled daughter work through her emotional issues. The gaslighting was so sophisticated and systematic that I almost began to doubt my own memories and perceptions. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was seeing conspiracy where there was only normal family dysfunction. Maybe Jake was right, and this was just a revenge fantasy born out of jealousy and disappointment. But then I remembered the letters my grandmother had written, letters that Jake had never seen, and my father did not know existed. I remembered the sound of her voice in those intercepted voicemails, the fear and confusion she expressed about the pressure she was feeling to make financial decisions she did not understand. I remembered the forensic evidence that Dr. Reeves had found, evidence that could not be explained away by grief or mental instability. My father might have outplayed me in this round, but the game was far from over. If anything, his willingness to corrupt Jake and launch a preemptive character assassination campaign proved that he knew the evidence against him was real and damaging. He was scared enough to risk exposing his own manipulative tactics, which meant he was more vulnerable than he wanted to appear. As I watched Celeste's wedding preparations continue with nauseating extravagance, I realized that my father's greatest strength was also his greatest weakness. His arrogance and need for public admiration made him incapable of backing down or laying low when he should have. He was going to use this wedding as a platform to demonstrate his power and generosity, and that performance would provide exactly the opportunity I needed for a different kind of justice. Just when I thought all hope was lost, salvation came from the most unlikely source imaginable. 2 days before Celeste's wedding, I received a phone call that would change everything and provide the final pieces of evidence needed to bring my father down in the most spectacular fashion possible. The caller identified herself as Jennifer Walsh, a former employee of my father's investment firm who had been following Amanda's preliminary reporting with great interest. Jennifer had worked as my father's personal assistant for 8 years before being suddenly terminated 6 months ago under suspicious circumstances that she had been afraid to challenge until now. I have been waiting for someone brave enough to go up against Richard Meadows, Jennifer said during our first phone conversation. I have evidence that will not only prove he stole from your grandmother, but also show that he has been running a massive Ponzi scheme using client investments to fund his lifestyle and pay fake returns to early investors. Jennifer agreed to meet me that evening at a coffee shop downtown, bringing with her a manila folder that contained the most damning evidence I could have ever hoped for. As a personal assistant, Jennifer had access to my father's private files, his personal communications, and most importantly, his computer passwords and digital records. I started keeping copies of everything about 6 months before he fired me because I suspected something was wrong, Jennifer explained as she spread documents across our table. Your father became increasingly paranoid about anyone seeing his client files or asking questions about specific investments. He started handling certain accounts completely himself, cutting out the other advisors and even the compliance officer. The documents Jennifer had brought were devastating in their comprehensiveness. Bank statements showing systematic fund transfers from client accounts into shell companies controlled by my father. Email communications with offshore banking services designed to hide asset movements from regulatory oversight. Most damning of all, a detailed spreadsheet that my father had been using to track which clients were asking questions and which ones were safe to steal from based on their age, health status, and family relationships. My grandmother's name was at the top of the safe list, along with a note that read, "Dementia progression makes detection unlikely daughter. Estranged, no oversight needed." Seeing my grandmother reduced to a line item in my father's criminal enterprise made me physically ill, but it also provided the emotional fuel I needed to see this through to the end. This was not just about family drama anymore. This was about stopping a predator who saw elderly clients as opportunities for exploitation rather than people deserving protection and respect. But Jennifer's most explosive revelation was yet to come. "The reason your father fired me was because I discovered that he was planning to fake his own death and disappear with the stolen money after Celeste's wedding," she said, pulling out a file folder marked Emergency Exit Strategy. "He has been moving assets to offshore accounts for months and setting up a new identity in a non-extradition country. The wedding is supposed to be his farewell performance before vanishing forever." The exit strategy documents were meticulous in their planning and chilling in their callousness. My father had been systematically liquidating client investments while providing fake statements showing continued growth. He had been using new client deposits to pay returns to existing clients, creating the classic Ponzi scheme structure that would inevitably collapse once he stopped feeding it new money. But most shocking of all was his plan to frame me for the financial irregularities after his disappearance. Documents showed that he had been setting up fake email accounts in my name and creating forged communications that would make it appear that I had been the one stealing from client accounts. He was planning to destroy my reputation and potentially send me to prison as part of his escape plan. I have been living in terror for 6 months, knowing what he was planning, but afraid to come forward because I thought no one would believe me," Jennifer said, tears streaming down her face. "When I saw that article about your investigation, I realized that you were the key to stopping him before he could hurt more people and destroy your life in the process." Jennifer had kept digital copies of every piece of evidence on multiple secure cloud servers, making it impossible for my father to destroy the records, even if he discovered her betrayal. She had also been secretly recording conversations with him for months, including several where he explicitly discussed his plans to steal client funds and frame me for his crimes. With Jennifer's evidence combined with what we had already gathered, we now had an ironclad case that would not only prove my father's guilt, but also prevent him from escaping justice or shifting blame to anyone else. Dr. Reeves confirmed that the forensic evidence was overwhelming and would be impossible to refute in court. Amanda was ecstatic about the expanded scope of the story and the dramatic elements of the planned escape and frame job. "This is not just local news anymore," she said excitedly. "This is a national story about financial predators, family betrayal, and attempted murder by proxy. Every major outlet in the country is going to want to cover this." But we still had to be strategic about timing and execution. My father was expecting his escape plan to unfold smoothly after the wedding, which meant he would be relaxed and off guard during the ceremony and reception. He would also be surrounded by the community leaders and potential witnesses who needed to see his downfall firsthand. Maria suggested that we use the wedding reception itself as the venue for the exposure, turning my father's moment of triumph into his public destruction. "Your grandmother always said that pride comes before the fall," Maria observed. "Let him have his spotlight moment before we turn off the lights forever." The plan we developed was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. We would allow the wedding ceremony to proceed normally, giving my father the opportunity to play his role as the generous patriarch one last time. Then, during his planned father of the bride speech at the reception, we would systematically destroy his reputation in front of everyone who mattered in his professional and personal life. Jennifer would provide the evidence to federal investigators the morning of the wedding, ensuring that arrest warrants would be ready to execute immediately after the public exposure. Amanda would have her story ready to publish within hours of the confrontation. Dr. Reeves would be standing by to provide expert commentary about the scope and sophistication of the financial crimes. Everything was finally falling into place for the most satisfying revenge I could have ever imagined. My father thought he was about to escape consequences and destroy me in the process, but instead he was walking straight into a trap that would ensure justice for every person he had victimized over the years. The morning of Celeste's wedding dawned bright and cloudless perfect weather for what was about to become the most memorable event in our town's social history. As I got dressed in my bridesmaid gown, I felt a strange calm settle over me. After months of planning, investigation, and emotional turmoil, the moment of truth had finally arrived. The wedding ceremony itself was everything Celeste had dreamed of and everything my father's stolen money could buy. The church was filled with white roses and crystal chandeliers. The string quartet played beautifully as my sister walked down the aisle in her $30,000 designer gown. For a moment, watching her radiant smile, I almost felt guilty about what was coming next. But then I caught sight of my father resplendent in his custom tuxedo, basking in the admiration of everyone who praised his generosity and devotion to his daughters. I thought about my grandmother's intercepted letters about Jennifer's evidence of systematic theft, about the dozens of elderly clients who had trusted him with their life savings only to be robbed blind. The guilt evaporated, replaced by steely determination to see justice served. The reception was held at the most exclusive country club in our area, with over 300 guests, including judges, business leaders, and politicians. My father had spared no expense, knowing this would be his final performance before disappearing forever. What he did not know was that federal investigators were already positioned around the perimeter, waiting for my signal to move in and make arrests. Everything proceeded normally through dinner and the traditional toasts. Celeste and Trevor looked genuinely happy, completely unaware that their perfect day was about to become a national news story. My mother fluttered around the reception hall accepting compliments on the beautiful event and her husband's obvious devotion to family. When my father stood up to give his father of the bride's speech, the entire room fell silent with anticipation. This was always the emotional highlight of any wedding reception, the moment when the patriarch shared his wisdom and love for the next generation. Instead, it was about to become his public destruction. My dear friends and family, my father began, his voice carrying the authoritative tone that had convinced so many people to trust him with their money. Tonight we celebrate not just the union of Celeste and Trevor, but the strength of family bonds that can never be broken. That was my cue. I stood up from the head table and walked to the microphone that had been set up for open toasts later in the evening. The room buzzed with confusion as I gently took the microphone from my father's hand. Actually, Dad, I think our guests would be very interested to hear about family bonds and trust, I said, my voice steady and clear despite my racing heart. Especially the trust that clients place in their financial advisors and the trust that elderly mothers place in their sons. The room went completely silent as I began to systematically lay out the evidence of my father's crimes. I described the forged will, the systematic theft from my grandmother's accounts, the Ponzi scheme that had been robbing clients for years. I explained how he had been planning to fake his death and frame me for his crimes, how he had corrupted my cousin Jake to spy on my investigation, how he had built his reputation and lifestyle on a foundation of lies and theft. With each revelation, I watched my father's face transform from confusion to anger to panic to desperate calculation. He tried several times to interrupt me, to dismiss my accusations as the ravings of a mentally unstable daughter, but the evidence was too comprehensive and the witnesses too credible. When I announced that Jennifer Walsh was present in the audience and had provided federal investigators with irrefutable proof of his crimes, my father finally snapped. In a moment that would be replayed millions of times on social media, he lunged at me with such violence that he sent me crashing into the marble wall behind the head table. The crack of my shoulder hitting stone echoed through the shocked silence of the reception hall. But instead of intimidating me into submission, the physical attack only proved everything I had been saying about his character and his willingness to hurt anyone who threatened his control. Federal agents moved in, immediately placing my father under arrest as 300 of the community's most influential people watched in stunned silence. The charges were read aloud in the same space where he had been accepting congratulations for his generosity just minutes before wire fraud, money laundering, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit identity theft, and now assault. As my father was led away in handcuffs, still shouting about conspiracies and ungrateful children, I felt a peace that I had not experienced since my grandmother's death. Justice was finally being served, and her voice was finally being heard. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Within 24 hours, Amanda's story had gone national, attracting attention from major news networks and financial crime investigators. The video of my father attacking me at the wedding reception went viral, garnering over 5 million views and sparking conversations about family abuse, financial elder abuse, and the importance of believing victims, even when their abusers seem respectable. My grandmother's will was overturned, and I finally received the inheritance she had intended for me. More importantly, dozens of my father's clients came forward with their own stories of suspicious investment behavior, leading to additional criminal charges and a massive restitution fund for victims. Celeste initially tried to defend our father, but when the full scope of his crimes became clear, she broke down and finally acknowledged the favoritism and emotional abuse that had shaped our childhood. We began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of honesty rather than competition for parental approval. The chosen family I built in the aftermath proved more loyal and loving than the biological one I had grown up in. Jennifer became a close friend and eventual business partner. Maria remained a surrogate grandmother figure who helped me process my grief and trauma. Amanda's reporting helped expose similar crimes in other wealthy communities, preventing countless additional victims. My father was ultimately sentenced to 25 years in federal prison and ordered to pay over $15 million in restitution to his victims. The house of cards he had built through decades of manipulation and theft had finally collapsed completely. But the most satisfying part of the entire experience was knowing that my grandmother's final wish had been fulfilled. She had wanted me to be strong enough to stop my father from hurting other people, and I had found the courage to do exactly that. Looking back on this whole experience, I learned that sometimes the family that raises you is not the family that truly loves you. Sometimes justice takes time, but it always finds a way. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth, no matter how much it costs or how many people try to silence you. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what is right? Have you experienced financial abuse or manipulation from people who were supposed to protect you? What would you have done in my situation when you discovered the extent of the betrayal? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please smash that like button and subscribe for more real family drama stories where karma finally gets served. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that justice is possible even when it seems impossible. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and remember that your voice matters, your truth matters, and no one has the right to silence you or steal your future. May you always have the courage to stand up for what is right, even when the people who should love you try to tear you down.